what I'm interested in hearing from you is what frustrations you hear from MSPs that are going down that journey, trying to get insured, because it's not just cyber insurance from their perspective, right? That they need. They also need technology errors and emissions and others, sometimes other forms of coverage, depending on what their client base is. What do you see kind of on that side of the world?
Well, there are two things. One is from their own standpoint, the biggest pain point for them is the complexity of applications that they get and how rapidly they change. And we've talked about this a lot, where a bad thing happens, another crazy question ends up in the questionnaire. And sometimes they aren't crazy questions, sometimes they are good questions, but they're to your point specific questions, as opposed to more how are you developing your architecture such that you have defense in depth, and what is the strategy around that? That's really ultimately the question that we're trying to get the answer to, so that when they go through underwriting, how do we properly understand if there's segmentation in a way that we can't have a broad level wholesale loss. And a lot of the applications we're seeing still aren't getting there, and so the applications are getting longer, but the MSPs feel like they're not getting to the right answer, and then they fill these big long things out, and then they're declined for coverage. And so it's like, gosh, it took me like 3 weeks to get through this thing, get through this underwriting thing, and then you say no. And so that is a real frustration, because they're really trying to do the things that they think should be done,
Mhm.
but it's not really, for depending on the size of the organization, right? For MSPs who are over 10 million in annual revenue, it's still a very serious pain point. As it relates to then working with their customers, I was recently at the Kaseya Connect IT conference, and I had several of them tell me that they're spending $40,000 to $50,000 a year worth of their own time doing applications for their customers. They
Mhm.
worry about the liability that they're incurring by filling these things out, though they own the infrastructure. So it's like, I think in summation, they feel like they spend half their lives filling out these crazy applications, and what's the benefit, and how are they really helping themselves and their customers? And I think that that's something that they're trying to be the best stewards, but how do we help them be more effective, and really demonstrate, to the point that you made at the beginning of this discussion, that these controls are managing the potential risks in such a way that they're deserving of discounts and so on.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Um, we hear similar things from our MSP partners in the communities that we belong to, and I would say I think one of the big questions that often comes up is, what does a healthy security program for an MSP internally actually look like? And from my perspective, it's, and this is not an exhaustive list, but these couple particular points are really key, and you touched on them when you were talking about identity and access management and privileged access management, because those two worlds of controls and how you apply them, although they don't have to be terribly complex, if you don't achieve the key outcomes of being able to, one, to the point that you raised, segmentation, segment the risk between the technology platforms, whether it's an RMM, your EDR, your MDR, whatever has kind of larger scale access to all of your customer environments. If you're not securing that in a way that allows you to flip access, reset passwords, put yourself in a position where, even if you have an employee that gets terminated, if there's an individual account that's compromised, or if there's any other event that occurs that would put you in a position where those credentials put the entire customer base at risk, if you don't have the levers to pull to deal with that relatively quickly and actually have a definitive response to it that resets that access, provides new credentials across the board, and locks out anyone who might have gotten unauthorized access appropriately, I think you're always going to be kind of behind the eight ball on any of those really nightmare situations that could come up. And there's not a lot of people talking about that, and it's surprising to me, because just like MFA for all organizations is really critical and kind of a bread and butter control that addresses, when it's implemented correctly, an overwhelming majority of initial access scenarios for a mid-level or mid-market enterprise, which really, like, if you look at an MSP internally and what type of organization they resemble most closely, it's more like a mid or large size business with the
Mhm.
complexities and security demands of a mid or large size business. And that's really what they have to solve for. And a lot of them think of themselves like their customers, even, for those smaller MSPs under like 5 million in revenue that are exclusively working in SMB circles. Their biggest customer might be 30 to 50 users and their smallest might be 1 to 5 or something like that. Um, those organizations still don't think of themselves as a more complex risk than their customers, and that's a big misnomer, I think, in the way that they kind of think about and conceptualize their security architecture. I'm curious, especially since you've been to Kaseya Connect and some other events recently in that space. Are you hearing MSPs talk about this at all? Are they aware of this? What is your general kind of sense of where they land on that conversation?
That certainly that it's an evolving viewpoint, and I think they're recognizing it. I think one of the big challenges for them is just feeling constrained for time. It's sort of like, the cobbler's children go barefoot kind of scenario, where they spend so much time trying to do the right things for their customers that they do forget that they are in a different architecture world, but they also feel the pinch of being a small business, like many of us feel like the pinch of being a small business. So there is definitely that dichotomy between those 2 points.
Mm,
But certainly, I also am seeing a lot of transition to outsourcing security functions, to be able to catch up, so that they realize that, look, I need to outsource this portion of the function so that we can be secure, our customers can be secure, and then we'll focus on the IT aspects of it, but integrate that into our suite so that there's continuity. And I am seeing a large portion of them starting to move in that direction, especially the smaller shops, just because there's just too much spread otherwise to manage. And I think that they're realizing that it's too much of a lift to try to do all those things and be able to do them well. So
mhm.
that's, like most small businesses, when you start to feel that constrained, you realize, what's the thing that I'm going to get the most lift out of in terms of value to my customer base to outsource, but that I can control and leverage and make sure that it's good for all of us.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I appreciate that insight.